Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 29. In this episode, we're talking a lot about the review process. There's been some controversy lately relating to some Marques Brownlee, another fellow YouTuber, his reviews and whether his reviews are killing companies because of negative reviews. So yeah, we just give our thoughts on what a review is, our process of reviews, and some interesting chat about advertising and those sorts of issues that are faced for reviewers and trying to keep things fair and balanced while also trying to support the channel. So if you like that sort of discussion, that's really what this episode is about, and just some insights into exactly what our job entails. So hope you all enjoy. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back, Steve. Podcasting time, as always, sitting here on a Friday. It's always nice to close out the week with some podcasting. We're going to talk this week about being a reviewer because there's been some controversy in, well, not specifically our space, but I feel like because we're part of the broader tech review community that maybe people will be interested in our thoughts. Probably not. I always say that people probably not that interested, but we'll talk about it anyway. How are you going?
Good. And I'm glad we can piggyback on someone else's controversy because there hasn't been review-related controversy in our space for about 10 minutes. So the fact that we can drag ourselves, I suppose we're dragging ourselves into another controversy to give our 2 cents unsolicited on this, and people are going to listen to that. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, if you haven't been following or you haven't seen, I know some people in our Discord community have been all over this topic and have been chatting about it, but basically there's been some controversy around Marques Brownlee's review of really a terrible product, the Humane pin, a product that I didn't really know all that much about, but once I sort of saw all this stuff come up, I watched his review and I'm like, yeah, that looks like a real piece of garbage. Fair enough. He showed all the flaws and stuff. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's just a normal sort of review. And then there was some Twitter backlash to this, I guess. A few people I'd probably describe as goobers saying that, Marques said in his review that it's one of the worst products he's ever reviewed. That was in the title. And then some people were claiming that, that was unethical to do that. It was careless and can ultimately lead to these companies being killed because the reviews are so negative. And this all then boiled into this discussion of what is a reviewer? What's the actual role of product reviewers? Can bad reviews kill companies? And Marques made a follow-up video on his channel where basically he had to kind of explain his job, which was kind of a bit weird. I feel like most people already know what a reviewer is, but clearly there are some people who don't. And to be fair, I feel like most people were dunking on the people that were criticizing this review. So there was a lot of backlash to the backlash of people who are very fairly understanding what a review is, where it's appropriate, whether or not saying things are the worst ever is unethical. Lots of people disagreeing with that take. But there still seems to be a few, specifically some points around YouTubers I think is worth talking about later. They're around just, what a reviewer is and sort of our role. So I guess I'll ask you first up, you've been doing this for even longer than I have. How do you see your role as a reviewer? Like, what is your job? What do you do? Who do you serve?
Well, first and foremost, you serve the person that is interested in purchasing the product to be used in whatever manner the product is meant to be used. So it's not for the people who are watching the content purely for entertainment purposes or like to stay up to date with the latest tech. Obviously, you want to give those people accurate information, but really the content should be designed as a reviewer to be a review of the product you're reviewing. So an honest, accurate assessment of the product. Now, there'll be some opinion-based stuff in there, some stuff that's probably a bit subjective, how it looks, all that sort of stuff. Like, I think if you've been following a reviewer like Marques for a long time and you sort of know what his tastes are, and if you've bought a product on his recommendation, you know sort of what you agree with him on or what he likes, and maybe you get a feel for it if you're familiar with his reviewing style. And if you're not, that's fine as well. But he's giving his opinion on, things that are subjective. I think I watched the review just recently because of the podcast, and I honestly thought it was really fair. He did a good job of, it was a very in-depth review. It was what a review should be. He clearly used it. He clearly tried to make it work and tried to enjoy the product the way it's meant to be used, I suppose, is a way of putting it, rather than he wasn't just dismissive of it. He didn't just go, well, this is crap, it doesn't work well, or it doesn't, I tried it one time and it didn't do the thing right, so therefore it's garbage. he really gave it a shot. He tried multiple different ways to make it work, and he went really in depth to let you know everything there really is to know about the product. It was a really in-depth hands-on experience. So from that perspective, he did his job very well. And then, yeah, I think a lot of with this sort of stuff, like, it's not even that subjective. Like, he's honestly giving feedback. It's fact. A lot of it was fact-based feedback, right? Like, he's not
Yeah, that's right.
It's not his feelings where he's like, oh, I sort of, don't like the way it feels or whatever. And he did comment on things like the weight of it and how it pulls on your clothes and all that sort of stuff, which, So anyway, I thought it was fine. I thought as a reviewer, he did really an amazing job. I thought the review was excellent. Tons of time and effort had been put into it. And yeah, I don't have any complaints about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really getting into the weeds of what the review should be, right? Like, if you're giving it a fair shake, you're testing it fairly, and crucially, if he hasn't gone and tested another similar competing product and done a totally different job where he's, I don't know, tested, done different test methodology, or he didn't go into as much depth on a similar product, then that would sort of be a bit unfair, where you could compare it from one review to another review and sort of say, well, he did all these specific tests to expose this product as being bad in this case, but then there's another case where he glossed over all that stuff. That's not the case with this sort of review. And as far as I've seen, I don't watch tons of Marques content, but from what I have seen, he seems to do pretty much the same thing with every product that he gets to test. Like, there was a car review recently, which I think also boiled into this whole discussion as well, where he called that the worst car that he'd ever reviewed. And it seemed to be very similar to his other car content. He just tested it the way that he tested, and he finds flaws with it, and those are worth bringing up. So long as you're making the reviews fair, you're testing them accurately, and you're presenting that everything fair and accurately, then it's perfectly fine to say something is the worst product you've ever reviewed, because there is going to be a product that you will review at that point that will be the worst ever. That's the case for all reviewers. There's probably a product I've tested that is the worst ever.
Yeah, I mean, getting hung up on the worst ever part, I don't even know what to say about that. Like, it's not something I would give time or energy. It's really, what that tells me is, so what you're telling me is the message that you are conveying to me is product bad. Like, not good. It really, really grinds my gears when people overanalyze like titles and stuff. Like, hang on a minute. Whoa. Is this really though? Are you lying? Now, let's put everything aside. $700 product, subscription, all the bad things that are factually bad about this product. It seems like reviewers at large are in agreement with what you're saying is true, Marques. So we've confirmed what you're saying is true. This is a very in-depth review. As far as I can tell, you've done your job well, but I'd like to challenge you on the title. Is it really the worst ever? So let's just create controversy around this. Let's put tons of time and energy into it, because if it's not the worst ever, if you can't, without question, provide evidence that this is the worst product you've ever reviewed, then I'm sorry, you're gonna have to delete that video. Like, it's like, what's the point of putting time and energy into talking about the worst ever product type review title? All it's saying is this is a very, very extremely horribly bad product that you shouldn't review, and I'm making it as concise as possible to let you know. It's just so silly.
It really is. And it's a subjective thing as well. Like, he's not saying this is the worst product ever, because that's a pretty bold claim, right? Like, I'm sure there's plenty of even worse products out there, but he's saying, effectively, he's shortened what is, in my opinion, this is the worst product I've ever tested into the title. And beyond that, it's like, a lot of people think that these titles are clickbait. Like, some of this controversy was people saying, like, it was unfair of him to put that in the title because it's so eye-catching, it's so damaging to the company to say that this is the worst ever reviewed. It's so visceral and bad that it must be clickbait. Like, he's done that to get the views on the video. It's like, no, it's not clickbait, because if you watch the video, it's backed up in the contents of the review. He clearly shows examples of why it's terrible. He clearly says in the review that this is the worst product he's ever reviewed. So it's not like he's made up some title and then not backed it up in the content, which is usually what I would class as like clickbait for the views. Like if he said this is the worst ever and you go in and it's some mild sort of timid criticism where there's like a few bad things, but it doesn't come out as being like a really horrible product, then you're like, okay, that's a bit weird. He said it's the worst ever, but it's didn't really seem that bad when you watch the review.
Yeah.
But you watch this review and you get the opinion that this is a genuinely awful product.
Mhm.
And so the title is fully justified. And yeah, sure, on YouTube, you kind of need to play the game. We've talked about this before, right? You got to play the title and thumbnail game so that you can get the most views that you can on the content, because you don't want to, as a content creator, create a review and then have no one watch it because you've titled it something boring and bland. But even with a channel of Marques' size, he still wants to be playing the game of making it attractive.
Yeah, it's like, do you want in-depth, honest reviews with high-quality production values? And do you want to essentially pay someone to spend a week or weeks of their time doing a thorough, in-depth analysis of this product to give you the best information possible? If you want those things, like the video has, what he's doing has to be successful. He has to be successful in what he's doing. If he's getting no views, he can't spend oodles of money on camera gear and time on editing and anyway, stuff that's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah, I would have thought it's pretty obvious. And another thing that I thought should have been pretty obvious to most people, but seems to be some people still are not really getting this, is that reviews they're not PR for products and companies. They are meant for viewers and readers, the consumer of the product, the buyer of the product. So I feel like most people get this, especially people who watch our content, because this is our entire philosophy of reviewing products, is making sure that we're considering the buyer and making the review centered around the buyer. But it feels like there are some people, and I'd probably call them, company shills. There's some grifters out there, some people who are maybe shareholders, people who don't want to see the stock price go down, all those sorts of things, who seem to think that a review is PR for the product. Like the reviewer's job is to showcase the product in the best light and tell people to buy it, basically, which is not a review at all. Some reviews are going to be like that. Some reviews, there's going to be positive thoughts about the product. It's going to be recommended. We'll be telling you to buy it because it's good. But that's not what the review is about. It's about evaluating it fairly for the reader, not just doing PR basically for companies. And I feel like there's even sometimes when we've dealt with PR firms at different companies that seem to also see reviews as more PR than an evaluation of the product. And it's just absolutely not what any serious reviewer is considering at all.
Plenty of examples of us running into these sort of things where some of the ones off the top of my head, remember the Asus, I think it was, was it a Radeon RX 5700 XT? Was it this? I think it was the Strix top end model.
Something like that. Yeah,
and we reviewed it and found that the cooling performance was really poor. And that took months of investigation to work out what was going on there. And we copped so much flack in the meantime for our flawed testing methods, and we don't know how to test hardware, and we got it wrong. The card's way better than what we're saying it is. Other reviewers got better temperatures. And then it was discovered that other reviewers got better temperatures because they tested it on a test bench where the card isn't mounted horizontally in a case. So, that was why the cool there. The MSI X570 motherboards, the hot VRM thermals. Again, that was one that MSI handled that really well. But then we had Tom's Hardware come late to the party on that to prove us wrong on something that MSI said we were right about. That was a different kind of controversy, but that was weird. So this sort of stuff does happen. And I
feel like the NVIDIA thing is kind of the biggest example that we've had of a company sort of not really liking our opinion about products. That I think our opinion in that content that we were making was totally fair. And that was even your opinion on things like ray tracing in reviews where you ultimately recommended the product, which made it even more bizarre, that whole scenario, right? So
yeah, that was weird.
And I think since then, NVIDIA has certainly changed their tune a bit when it comes to how they see a review as an evaluation of a product as opposed to PR. And I think, to some of the things that I've been dealing with recently, one of the companies that I find more difficult to work with on the monitor side has always been Samsung. They seem to float in and out of being willing to work with us and send us review samples and give us information about like firmware updates and things like that, which I find very valuable. Even just like, hey, we've got a new firmware update, we think it's worth testing, those sorts of things. And then sometimes it'll be like, I'll send them emails and I won't get any response. And it seems to coincide with whether we're producing more positive reviews or more negative reviews towards Samsung products.
Mhm.
So, and in contrast to that would be a company that's like MSI, for example, where we could say that a product is bad and they seem to take it more on the chin and not really get too hurt over it. But
Mhm.
ultimately, like, we're not doing this job and creating reviews for companies to inflate their stock price or have nice KPIs in the background being like, oh yeah, we got this nice positive coverage. It's like sending a review unit to a reviewer is about, it's kind of like a chance thing. Like, you're sending it out we think the product is good as from a company perspective. So you send it out, you hope for the best, you hope for a good review. So, because that does genuinely improve sales of products,
Mhm.
but it has to be a fair, honest review, and you have to take the bad with the good. The good can significantly improve sales, and the bad is obviously going to hurt sales, but that's all part of the process. And you'd hope that more often than not, the company's making good enough products that they're going to, generally speaking, get the positive reviews that those products deserve. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've had companies over the years tell us, right, that a positive review does genuinely improve sales of
Mhm.
products. I think
Oh,
there's
yeah.
been some motherboard vendors and stuff that have told us this over the years. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Makes sense though, right? If people are watching that content for buying advice, and
Mm,
you're saying that this is the best monitor or a great value monitor, or something to be on the lookout
mhm,
for, then that's going to help, opposed to you saying don't buy this, it's not very good. uh, but again, when you say that, you're not saying it because you don't like the company or it's something personal. you
mhm,
you're doing this in-depth testing. Like, there's very clear reasons for why you're not recommending a certain product, and then when you get to the end of
mhm.
the review, you say, I'm not recommending it because uh, it performs poorly or whatever the reasons may be. And then in the case of like the X570 motherboards from MSI, and Marquez talks about this as well, is is that it's kind of nerve wracking when you find problems with products. You should think, okay, I don't want to just say in the review the MSI X570 motherboards have really poor thermal performance, because they shouldn't, based on the spec sheet, but they do. So is there something wrong with my testing? Is the sample or the board, the particular retail board that I purchased, defective in some way? Is there maybe a bug that I've found that can be easily, addressed with a firmware update? So that's all a bit nerve wracking. And then there are ways, like Marquez said, he talks with other reviewers to see, did they find the poor battery life or overheating issues or whatever it may have been. And I've reached out to other reviewers and said, have you found this? And then in the case of the VRM thermals, it's a bit tricky because no one else had done that testing. And there are a few people at the time who were doing that testing. I was certainly the first one to really tackle that board. So I reached out to MSI and I just said, here are all my results. I was very transparent with them. I said, here's all the results I have. And as you can see, your boards are atrocious. Is there a reason for this? Is there something that you think's wrong with my testing? And they said, yeah, that looks really bad, leave it with us. They came back days later and said, yeah, we regret to inform you that unfortunately your results are accurate and our product's not very good. And they just copped it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was very good of MSI to do that. There are some other companies um, that I won't name, but maybe four-lettered sort of companies that will give us the runaround and say our data's wrong, and they've got different data, and then you spend weeks going back and forth, and then it turns out no, your data was fine, and they're just
Yeah.
trying to convince you to change the numbers or whatever. So that's frustrating.
Yeah. And I think as a reviewer, there's a lot of judgment calls that go into the process of when you find issues with the product, to whether it requires, as sending the results to the company,
Mm-hmm.
because there are some things that are just going to be bugs
Mm-hmm.
which could easily be fixable, or might be an issue with one specific product as opposed to all the products. Like, there might be a faulty component on the motherboard or monitor or graphics card or whatever that means that product is underperforming or doesn't work properly. Sometimes you even get fully broken or dead products straight out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you have to contact companies about those sorts of things. But then there are times when what you've discovered is an inherent issue with the product. Like, it's not a bug, it's not a just a one-off with that specific unit. That is what the product is, as you said, with those motherboards. And yeah, it can be difficult when you find that sort of problem, you're getting feedback from the company and they do try and stuff you around because they can waste a lot of your time and delay the review until the point where it's not a relevant product to be testing anymore. So
Mhm.
there's always this fine line as a reviewer that you're kind of balancing between, how much of the review results do you disclose because you're not wanting to go on this run around of people trying to waste weeks of your time trying to disprove things that ultimately prove to be correct. But you also need to be fair about if there's bugs and issues with products that are easily resolvable, then you need to know. And often it's on top of that helpful to have explanations for why things are going badly with a specific product. But this can even be like a company versus company basis as to, if you've had better experiences getting feedback from some companies than others, then
Mhm.
that's probably going to help out with some of those things. But yeah, it's always I agree. You use the word nerve wracking when it comes to finding issues with products.
Mhm.
And I'd certainly agree with that because, yeah, even after the publishing of some of those bits of content, you always get more feedback and more pushback after you release a negative review compared to a positive review. So there's always you don't want to get things wrong when you're talking about a product and calling it bad because companies are likely to come with you at emails being like, hey, can you give us more information, more clarity on this? How did you test it? What did you do? We're trying to replicate this in our labs or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I would certainly prefer that most of the content that we produce is about products that are worth recommending, that are genuinely good.
Mhm.
I think that, in the GPU situation that we're in at the moment, where things are not
Mm.
overly exciting, right? It's much better to be talking about products that are positive than products that are negative. And I don't know if we've mentioned this on the podcast before. I feel like we have, but I think a lot of people think that like negative reviews always do much better on YouTube. There's always the thing of, oh, you can produce this title and thumbnail saying this is the worst product we've ever reviewed that gets mega views, and surely that's that's what most reviewers like is the negative stuff because it drives more interaction. But I think both of us are in agreement when we say that positive reviews are generally better for the channel. They're better for the consumers. They're better to make. They're nicer content to be producing stuff about. So at least that's where I sit on that.
Yeah, for the most part, that's true. Obviously, there are outliers, and I'm sure this video review from Marques Brownlee has blown up massively because of all the controversy
Yeah.
that's surrounding it. Even though quite a few people reviewed it, and I'm not even sure his was the most negative review, but probably one of the most prominent reviews.
Hmm.
So that video is probably done better than you expect. But having said that, if this was some sort of revolutionary, game-changing device that everyone really must have, then I'm sure long-term that video would actually end up doing better in terms of views. And we've certainly seen that. If there's a graphics card that has some sort of fundamental flaw and we expose that, that'll get some initial traction and do quite well view-wise, but then teeter off. Whereas if there's a really good value product that proves to be a good product for the life of the product, and it basically ends up like a GTX 1080 Ti type situation, they always get twice as many reviews after a few years. And really, on YouTube, you want a video that does pretty well initially, but does well for an extended period of time, rather
Hmm.
than a drama type video that's, I guess, how news videos would perform. If there's a hot news topic, it'll do quite well initially and then just dead. There's just
Yeah.
very little to
Yeah.
no views moving forward. And they're not great videos or great content for building your channel. So, as you say, you really want good products that are exciting products. You would have said it before. You review a monitor that was pretty good value. Let's just say like an average type product that was pretty good value. And that probably does average type views. But then if later in life it's still being produced and it turns out being quite good value because it drops in price, or it's a
Hmm.
great price even in some regions, you'll see the slow burn effect in that video and it'll end up doing much better than other videos because it just stays relevant for so much longer. So that's really what
Yeah.
we want. We want good products that continue to be good products for whatever reason, whether it's discounts or updates.
I think you have to almost factor that into reviews. At least I think if I look at the evolution of like how I've reviewed products over time, there has been an acknowledgement of that effect where you sort of see that if products remain good or become good later in their life cycle, then they people are going to be watching that video. So when I make reviews now, especially the monitor side of things, it's always thinking about the pricing at launch when we're talking about it in the review is obviously very important at that time, because that sets the scene of how it was released and
Mm-hmm.
the competition at the time and how that all factors in. But I often, temper that a little bit with thinking about, if this product, like, what's the level of pricing it needs to get to be a good product relative to its competitors. So I'm often talking about, at the moment in the US, this product is not worth recommending because it's poor value at this price. But if it was $200 cheaper, then it would be a really good buy. Or if in your region, product A versus product B is a bit more evenly balanced or a bit more competitive, then it would be worth buying. And I feel like that has enhanced those reviews and made it better for the people who are watching it 6 months in the future, which is potentially could happen for a product that is average or well received. But if it's a bad product, right, there's no real saving it in that sense. But
Well,
those are the sorts of pieces that you want.
Yeah, that can be frustrating as a reviewer as well, because you reviewed it accurately at the time, and then you get those comments like, this aged poorly, and they try to make out that you didn't do a very good job initially, despite the fact that it was an in-depth review that covered everything really well and exposed the issues with the product that then then resulted in the product getting better. And there's so many examples of this, like NVIDIA DLSS. I remember you wrecked it in Battlefield 5 because it was atrocious. And really, everyone agreed that DLSS, that implementation of it, was atrocious. It was never good. And NVIDIA even came out and said they've essentially reinvented DLSS. And eventually
they completely redid it. It's a completely different technique now than it was to begin with.
And they made it good. Then you got slammed with like follow-up comments. I imagine they have to sort of be, NVIDIA fanboys, just ignoring the fact that your review was 100% accurate and led, or at least aided, in the improvement of the technology. Because technologies don't get better. If another example was Intel APO, the application optimization software feature. And I said in my review that this shouldn't be locked down to specific 14th generation parts, should be on 13th and even 12th generation parts. It should be in more games, all this. And I really basically let the viewers know they should be pushing back and making their voice heard on places like Reddit and X and all that, to let Intel know that they're not impressed and they won't buy another Intel processor again, because these locked down software features that should be accessible by all just aren't satisfactory. And they did that. Intel opened it up, and then we got comments like, this aged poorly. It's like, what? Because they did the thing we asked them to do. I'm not sure you understand how this works.
And I think people as well, they fail to realize how bad a product review would be if you were factoring in the future potential of products. Product review should always be based on what a product is offering right now to buyers, not on future promises. There are some things that you can talk about in reviews where a company may promise a feature in the future and it's advertised on their product page, and you can sort of talk about that because, well, if they didn't deliver on that, they would be false advertising that product. But largely speaking, I try as best as possible, and I know you do as well, to avoid thinking about AMD Fine Wine is an example of, we're not reviewing a product like an AMD GPU and going, okay, well, it performs like this now, but we've seen in the past that AMD GPUs could gain 5 or 10% or whatever percentage you want to make up more performance in the future. Therefore, this product isn't as bad as it was because of the fine wine effect that you'll see over the next year. It's like, that is a bad way to review products. You're not giving, you can't guess what a product is going to be like in the future. They could be a fine wine effect, or they could not be a fine wine effect. So if I reviewed DLSS 1 and I was saying like, this is really terrible right now, but we don't know what it's going to be like in 2 years. They could totally redo the technology and make it great, and then DLSS would be great, and everything I've just talked about is irrelevant and not, wasn't really worth talking about, right? Like, I could say that, but that's not what a review is about. Like, I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm evaluating what the product is right now. And if there's future updates, there's future firmware releases for various different products that we cover, or driver updates, whatever, you go back and you reevaluate the product a second time. You don't preempt all of that in the review, because then the review is worse, basically. So, with DLSS, we had to cop it a little bit. We we've done the right thing though, in that we've continued to evaluate their technology as it has improved. We didn't create the DLSS1 content, say it was crap, and then never touch on it ever again. Like, we just ignore it. Like, we have one evaluation and that's it.
Mhm.
There's been countless times where we've gone back and reevaluated products, retested things with updated firmware, updated drivers. A lot of your testing for each new product review is brand new testing at that time with the
Mhm.
very latest driver updates, game patches, everything. So yeah, that is ultimately the best way of doing it. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, and something that I find very annoying to me, is the whole thing about YouTubers being kind of devalued when it comes to reviews and journalism in some people's eyes. I feel like a lot of YouTubers are grouped together and sort of tarred with the same brush. Like, everyone on YouTube is a shill or an influencer, or is doing paid sponsored content. And, it can't be possible that YouTubers are doing fair, legitimate reviews, because that's reserved for traditional outlets or traditional journalism. And I've seen some takes on this whole Marques Brownlee situation where they've agreed that reviews are for consumers, that saying things are, the worst ever is fair, and that it's not unethical or careless or whatever. That people have agreed with that take, but have said, yeah, but also YouTubers are kind of like the trash tier of reviews, and it's easy for people to think that Marquez's review is clickbait or whatever because he's a YouTuber.
Mhm.
And I think that this is just a horrendous, awful, awful, incorrect take.
I think it's just disingenuous. I think they're lying to themselves, and they're not even trying to convince themselves of something. Really, it's just a situation of picking and choosing when it suits you to what is legitimate or not legitimate forms of media. So
Yes.
if a YouTuber is saying something you really strongly agree with, then YouTube as a independent media is the best and it's the only legitimate form of blah 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 blah, so on and so forth. And then as soon as they say something that you disagree with, the legacy or more traditional media is the only fair and professional,
Mhm.
true journalistic integrity, blah 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 blah. So it's just it's a pick and choose thing. As far I don't take anyone seriously who says that, because you can't take them seriously. Anyone who just sort of treats everyone or lumps everyone in a group like everyone's the same. So I don't know. I probably shouldn't give any names, but like, Jake Paul and Marcus Brownlee are the same person. Like
Yeah.
they do the same thing, like, because they're both YouTubers. Like, that's just silly. But you could say the same thing about TV, right? There's certain TV programs that are very different to other TV programs, and trying to paint them as being the same is a bit weird. So it's just you
Yeah.
can't. It's hard. I guess it's just it's hard to take anyone seriously who says that sort of thing.
I totally agree with that. I think part of it is also potential gatekeeping as well. Like, people who, maybe they have a vested interest or were previously part of the traditional media or worked for newspapers and I don't know, older school media in that way, are sort of, they're trying to keep the newer independent YouTube platforms and even newer stuff like TikTok and all that sort of thing. They're trying to keep those out because there could be potential threats to those forms of media. I'm not saying that everyone on YouTube is doing, a top tier job. There are certainly people who I would definitely class as shills and influencers and do
Mhm.
sponsored content largely. And that's very much the case on places like Instagram and TikTok, where the type of content that is made there leans more towards the influencer type content that you would see from longer form stuff like YouTube. Like, it's very hard for one of my monitor reviews to be distilled into the length of a video that someone would watch on
They
TikTok.
they get weeded out on YouTube as well. Like,
Yeah, that's
I think
right.
most people know, and yeah. Well, let's just talk about ourselves, I suppose, because I don't want to, again, put other names out there. But I think people who've been watching us for long enough know legitimately that we do not take money from AMD, Nvidia, or Intel. Like, we just don't directly work with those companies in that sense for advertising. Um, like, it's pretty well known at this point, and they also know that MSI. Well, for example, they are actually, as it turns out, sending us to Computex this year, and despite that, will crap on their products before, during, and after, if required, in a
Mhm.
fair manner, backed up by in-depth testing. So, uh, yeah, I don't know what more to say to that. Really, it's just you basically watch YouTubers and you work out who are legit and who aren't legit, and that's really decided by the viewers. And you don't really get a huge, what do we say, fan base viewership that Marques has by doing dodgy reviews. And we have seen the influencer type unboxing type things on YouTube, and they've died off.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
People pick and choose what they want to watch, and it's pretty hard to convince the masses if you're doing something dodgy. Like, people will work it out. They're not that dumb.
It's not like YouTube's the only platform with those issues, right? Like, YouTube is ultimately, it's just a platform. It's just a method that people can deliver content to people. And it just so happens to be one of the largest platforms that's out there that isn't heavily curated. It's basically just like another internet. Like, there's been plenty of websites that are very bad and very dodgy, do shill type stuff. And there's plenty of legacy old school media outlets on the internet as well that are producing much higher quality content. But it's all on the same platform, in the same way that YouTube, the high quality reviewers and the shill reviewers are on the exact same platform. Like, you can think about like a user benchmark, for example, that's on the internet in the same way that plenty of traditional media outlets are on the internet. There's all those SEO spam websites where you click on them, they claim to be doing a review, and it's just like AI copy paste garbage, or they're just listed basically the marketing points of the product with affiliate links, and there's no original testing, there's no product photography, there's nothing. That is on the exact same platform that is all the high quality content is on, and it's no different on YouTube. And as you talked about, it's about the viewers, the readers, the consumers, or whoever assessing for themselves who deserves the reputation and the viewership and the trust that's on the people watching the content. We don't get to decide whether our content is trustworthy. We can do the best job that we can do. We can uphold the standards that we think should be upheld to when it comes to reviewing, and do things the way we think that it should be done. But the trust in our content comes from the viewers, not from just the fact that we're on YouTube or not on YouTube. Like, our exact same reviews largely are on TechSpot. Like, you can read them on a website form, but because they're on a website doesn't mean they're more trustworthy than on YouTube. It's literally the exact same content.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even say, I don't know how you would see this, but I would say that if I am looking for a review of a product, like a legitimate, in-depth, well-tested review, that I am more likely to find that on YouTube than on any other platform, internet, written media, journals, or whatever the case may be. I feel like YouTube has the biggest chance of finding that. And that's not to say you can't find quality reviews in those other places, but I feel like these days the amount of quality work being done on YouTube is really good to see. Like, it's in a really good place, and there's just so much broad availability of that content that YouTube is genuinely a great place for reviews at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's my go-to these days for sure. And even something like this Humane pin, you can type that in to the YouTube search. I imagine Marques's review is probably number one, but you can watch his, and then you can watch another one, and then you can watch another one, and if you need to, you can watch another one, and probably do that for the next 4 hours, and you'll have so many different opinions on a certain product, and you'll have it probably looked at from a few different perspectives, a few different unique perspectives, and you're better judge for yourself. And I know when we release a day one content piece on a new GPU or CPU or whatever it may be, I race around and have a look at Gamers Nexus and Andy at eTechnics and Kit Guru and all the other guys out there, and see what they have to say about the product, and see if it, hopefully they've come to a similar conclusion to me, because I don't, obviously, if everyone's saying the same thing and it's different to me, then there's a problem. But yeah, I race around and see what they all have to say. So it's easy to get all of those opinions on that platform. And generally speaking, as you say, a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into it. They want to create high quality content. And the whole shilling thing obviously doesn't happen nearly as much as what people think, especially with well-established channels. If you've got a channel with a big following, it's really important to protect that by doing good quality work, high quality work, honest work, and and not just that, not being lazy, doing the best quality work that you can possibly do. That's the way forward, and that's the way to grow on YouTube and be successful. So the shilling's more likely to occur with smaller channels that are sort of more desperate to try and make it and pay for all the equipment and things you need. I'm not accusing small channels of doing that. I'm not trying to do like, I don't know, someone will accuse me then of gatekeeping. I'm just saying that would make sense because, I mean, you look at MKBHD, looking at his views now, and the channel alone, based on a very base AdSense rate, would have to be making between 75,000 and 150,000 US per month. And it could be significantly more than that, but that's the minimum that channel would make per month. You know, I suppose that's the problem with greed, right? No matter how much money you make, some people just want to make more. But I think for a guy like Marques, a guy like us, you wouldn't be, oh, can we do a dodgy deal to rip off my audience who I'm very loyal to? And, you know, it's not happening. It's not happening. The guy makes more than enough money. I'm sure he's not money focused or sitting there counting his dollars or thinking about how much money he's making. He would be, and it comes through in his videos. It seems like he's heavily invested into the technology, genuinely excited about it, genuinely passionate about it, and wants to produce the highest quality, best reviews that he possibly can. And that's really his focus.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about smaller channels, like potentially being, you know, doing those dodgy deals and things, I think that comes from there's just being a lot more smaller channels, right? Like to get to being the position of a Marques Brownlee, or even, you know, we're not on the level of Marquez's channel in terms of views or anything, but we're a fairly sizable
small channel comparatively.
Sure, we're a small channel in comparison, but we're a larger channel than the channels that you were talking about taking those sorts of deals.
And I suppose just to clarify that, I have no evidence that happens. I'm not saying that happens. I'm just saying it would make more sense that it happens there opposed to well-established channels with a large audience. That's all I'm saying.
And I think part of that as well is that the larger that channel that you are, the more opportunities there are to do not dodgy deals. Like I remember how small was our channel when we were getting CD key offers and like dodgy software deals.
Like, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, and again, I like to think, I would say that Marques is probably similar to us in the way he approaches it. We're excited about the products and making the content for our viewers, and we still get those offers. I think it was last year or late 2022. We turned down a 6-figure offer from a CD key seller to run 1 ad a month for 12 months on our channel. So over $100,000 in our pocket, we just said no, because, you know, we don't, for various reasons I probably won't get into here, because we don't have necessarily evidence to make the claims, but we strongly suspect that it's not all above board. And I guess the amount of money they're able to offer as well sort of suggests that perhaps too much profit's being made there. Not sure on that one, but my point is we didn't think it was above board for various different reasons, so we turned them down. More recently, BetterHelp came to us with quite a substantial offer with a long-term deal on the table, but there were I think there was data concerns there, previous data concerns with that company, so we decided, look, sorry, we're not going to go with you guys. We can't fully trust that you have, you know, your ethics are as sound as we'd like them to be, let's say. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I've given some exact examples, but there are many examples each year of us turning down significant dollars, like really, certainly significant to us. Like, I don't know if we need to make more money, but we could certainly make a lot more money, and we would have to run those kind of ads, which I'm sure we would get away with running, and there wouldn't be much blowback and probably wouldn't really hurt us long term, at least not in a significant way, but would make us a lot of extra money. But we just don't believe in advertising those services and products, so we don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, the CD key deal would have paid for an employee.
Yeah,
like
that's
that
right.
single deal, we could have hired someone based on that deal alone. The larger of a channel that you are, the more of the legitimate, not some of those companies that we work with, I still think are more legitimate than not, but you get better deals the larger of a channel that you are. So you get, you know, MSI, LG, those sorts of companies coming to you and being like, hey, we can advertise, you know, do you want to advertise products on the channel? And that's that's a much better position to be in than having the only options being CD key sellers and those sorts of things, which, if I look at what comes into our Monitors Unboxed email as sort of being that small sort of channel, it's most of the things that people are trying to get on the channel are things that I would describe as dodgy, and that includes CD key sellers and all those sorts of things. And that was certainly the case when Hardware Unboxed was starting out. And then as you grow and grow, you get the better deals, the better opportunities. And I think with the smaller creators, like, people do get weirded out. There's a lot more smaller creators, and the people that sort of take that path and create largely sponsored content, eventually there's just people aren't interested in that sort of content. There's limited growth opportunities for doing that sort of thing. A lot of people are trying to get on that bandwagon, and they all get filtered out. So while, yes, I agree that I think that there's the potential for a lot of smaller creators to be taking those sorts of deals, to get to the position that a lot of the channels are today, a lot of people aren't really taking those sorts of deals, and it doesn't really lead very far. So again, I don't, like you say, don't really have a ton of evidence to suggest that all small creators are dodgy. I don't think that's the case, but my perspective is more that there's so many smaller creators that the ones that I think most people would be thinking about when we're talking about smaller creators have a reputation and a size that makes them not in that sort of category. They're sort of broken out or not doing those sorts of things, generally speaking. At least the ones that, I think of like a Daniel Owen, for example. There's no evidence on his channel at all that he takes those sorts of deals. And that's definitely going to put his channel in a really good position long term, where he can continue to create the honest, fair content that I see that he makes on his sort of channel. So
yeah, that's right. It was almost certainly poor choice of words or poor phrasing on my behalf, because I didn't mean to dunk on smaller creators. I meant more that when you're a smaller creator, as you say, there's less opportunity for those deals, so you're more likely to take those deals. And some of them, I'm sure, even take them unknowingly, like thinking that the CD key sellers, for example, are all above board. And there's and again, we're judging them based on what has been exposed in the past. So if you've been exposed in the past for some kind of fraud, and that's why we lost the NordVPN deal as well. We didn't lose it. We backed out of it because they were exposed to be doing some shady things that they claimed they weren't doing, such as keeping user data and all that sort of stuff. I'm going back quite a few years ago now. But again, we had quite a lucrative contract that we had signed with NordVPN that fortunately we managed to get out of because this information went public. It was unknown to us at the time that it was keeping user data, wasn't it? And they said they didn't do that.
Something like that. Yeah.
We're going back We're going back quite a few years ago now, but we had just signed with NordVPN because we thought they were. I use NordVPN, by the way, on time to time. I think it's quite a good service. So I would probably be in a position where I would, I don't know. Anyway, VPNs are a bit of a sketchy grey area, but the point is we don't do VPNs much anymore. We have we gone back to Nord at all?
Can't remember.
Yeah,
I think we ran maybe a VPN ad on Monitors Unboxed at one point.
But
I try not to think too much about the ads, let's be honest.
A lot of stuff, goes into checking into VPNs and things these days, whereas I guess the point I was trying to make was originally a lot of those companies were taken at face value because I guess the service did work well. Like if you use NordVPN and you enable the VPN, it's quite fast. It allows you to get around the things and do, generally speaking, what it is you want to do with them. But then it's a problem when they say they don't keep user data and then it's exposed that they keep user data. That's obviously a big problem.
That's right. So, that's sort of how it goes really for these sorts of channels. And I imagine that, again, most of the channels that I would get my information from, that I'm interested in getting my information from, are not taking these deals. And I think as a creator, you kind of get the best insight into what a dodgy piece of content looks like because you can see the terms that are offered to you for sponsored content and paid reviews and those sorts of things. Like you can sort of see what companies are after when they're making those sorts of deals. Like I feel like a lot of people assume that there's like companies out there that are paying for like small modifications in reviews to make their product like 5 or 10% better in the charts, to
Mm.
maybe bump them up a little bit, or that there's all this like shady manipulation going on behind the scenes where, yeah, companies are just paying for small changes. Whereas everything that I've ever seen in terms of documents, offers, things being sent to us to make sponsored content on our channel is the complete opposite of that. Companies are not interested in paying for small changes. They want the whole works. Like
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
if they're paying, let's say a 5-figure deal, like they want $10,000-$20,000 to make a sponsored video, they don't want you to say that they're slightly in a better position than their competitors, or that, oh, maybe I'd recommend this over that. They want you to definitively say that their product is the best product and that all the other products are irrelevant. And that, there's even sometimes we've seen clauses where you're not even allowed to show the competitor's product in
That's what I was
any
going to say.
way.
It's like a competitor delete mod.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. That's the most common one I've seen, is that it's highlighting the product in question without showing any competing products or mentioning any competing brands.
Yes.
That's probably the most common one I've seen.
Yeah, that's right. And I think if you think about it from a business perspective, like if you could pay someone that amount of money to make the content that we've been talking about, the delete the competitors, only show their products, and you could pay them the same amount of money to do slight dodgy manipulations of data and change things up a little bit, you gotta think like what's more effective? Like small manipulations that people may not notice or may not factor into people's buying decisions at all, or people saying definitively that a product is good. Like companies want to pay for what they want to pay for. They want results, and really that comes down to paying for reviews that have no competitors mentioned and that sort of thing. And again, like as far as I'm aware, from most creators, like those sorts of things are pretty rare. Like it's a
Yeah,
lot of, I've seen a lot of people saying, "Oh, that must have been shill content or paid content," and then I look at it, I'm like, "There's nothing in here that an advertiser I'm aware of or that we've worked with would have paid for that content to have been made." So it's hard to sort of describe, because I imagine there's a lot of people that wouldn't trust this or wouldn't trust this information. We could say that those deals aren't being done, and then people would be like, "Well, you don't see the deals or whatever." But it's just from our perspective of seeing, from being on the inside and seeing what happens, that I don't think those sorts of things are made very often.
yes, that's right. I was trying to think of any examples that I have, but the most recent example I can think of was probably going back about 5 years now. Intel was trying to promote the 7980XE and the Extreme Edition CPU, and they wanted creators to do content with that CPU, like overclocking. It was
Mhm.
actually very heavily gaming focused, like why it's the best gaming CPU. And I remember getting emailed, they were quite forthcoming, like the full contract, like we'll provide you with the CPU, you can keep that. It was quite an expensive product, and you just have to make a dedicated uh, content piece about why this CPU is the best for gaming. And yeah, you couldn't talk about Ryzen. There was to be no mention of Threadripper or Ryzen, no comparisons, nothing like that. So that's the last time I can remember a company doing that. And it is technically legal. Like they're disclosing that too, and then you're meant to disclose that to the audience that it's a sponsored thing
Mhm.
by Intel. So it's all technically above board. And if it's made clear to the audience that it's sponsored by Intel, then I guess that's fine. But as you say, you don't really grow in the space by taking those kind of deals and doing that kind of content, because you're just wasting people's time, because it's sort of like manufactured content.
I feel like there's some creators that have found a really good balance for their sponsored content. Like I don't want to sit here and say that that's all sponsored content can ever be. I feel like there's been some types of channels that are more geared towards making sponsored content. Like it really depends on the sort of channel that you have. Like as a heavily reviewed and analysis focused channel, if we went and made like a feature piece that's sponsored in the way that you've been described, like we would be wasting the time of viewers. Like there's just no doubt about it. If most of the videos we make are analysis based, fair analysis, reviews, comparisons, and then we turn around and we do something that has got very few comparisons to competing products, is basically just featuring the product, then I feel like we'd be wasting people's time. But there are some channels where I feel like there's been some really effective, almost like factory tours and those sorts of
Yeah,
things,
I
which
mean,
have been sponsored by companies to go to a factory to see what's been going on inside. And the
sure.
content is interesting and valuable, but it still is ultimately a disclosed sponsored video from that company.
Yeah, I mean,
So there are ways to do it.
we do that at Computex, which is what we've said. Like MSI sponsor us to go to Computex to then cover their products, but we're also free to say whether we liked the product or not and what we thought of it. Like we're free to. There's no constraints there. We can
Mhm.
say that MSI has this new case, but I don't really like the look of it, or this part of the design looks a bit concerning. We're gonna have to test that and see if it's any good. Like it's not an in-depth review, and we're free to go over to any of their competitors, Asus, ASRock, whoever it is, and cover their products as well, and say positive things about their products if we think that's warranted. So what you're saying is true. Things can be sponsored, but they can be free of any terms and conditions from the company that's sponsoring it. Whereas in the example I
Mhm.
gave from Intel, they had very strict and very clear guidelines on what that content was to be. So there wasn't that much creative freedom. Like you had to do certain things to
Yeah.
to get the product.
And I think that's the difference between, say, sponsoring a specific video versus sponsoring, say, coverage of a trade show, where
Mhm.
largely those sorts of deals that we're making to have us sent to Computex are around the pre-roll advertising that we put into our
Sure,
Computex
yeah.
coverage, which, as you say, kind of makes that weird thing where MSI could be sponsoring their new monitor in a pre-roll ad at Computex, and we're going to the Asus booth and talking about how good the Asus monitors are.
Mhm.
So it does create that sort of weird thing. And it's like, I know that this could be potentially an entirely different podcast episode talking about how we approach advertising and the separation between making the content and advertising, and how at times that can get a little bit messy. But you want to have as much separation as possible to do your job in the best way possible. But I also think that as a professional reviewer, it's kind of your job to, when you're coming to reviewing products, to do that job properly and not have external factors influence reviews. Because I often see criticism of, for example, people getting sent products to review from companies versus buying them
Mhm.
entirely. So
Which makes
even if
no
it's like
difference.
not a product that you get to keep or whatever, it's just they're sending it and you have to send it back versus you having no involvement with the company and buying it using your own hard-earned money. And the thinking there being that because you're spending your own money, that you're going to have a more fair and honest review. But as a professional reviewer that's been doing this job, what I think is the best way that I can for quite a while now, that has absolutely no impact whatsoever on whether whether I buy it or have it sent to me. It does not impact my review process at all. Like I run the
Well,
same tests, I come to the same conclusions based on the same data. I try and do my job as professionally with as I'm invested in making the content as good as I can make it, and having those things affect the reviews is not doing my job properly.
yeah, I can honestly say half the time I don't actually know if we paid for it or if it was sent to us. Like,
Yeah.
I order that much. Like for the B650 content I just did, most of those boards I purchased. I don't even know how much money I spent. I doubt I don't know. We would have broke even on that because we did have an in-stream ad. But if we didn't have the in-stream ad, we would have probably roughly broken even on that content because I bought so many of those boards. It was probably about 1,000
Yeah.
Australian dollars worth of boards. Some of them were sent though. I can't remember which ones were which. There was no dodgy situations where they wouldn't send a board because they knew it was crap. Generally, I'll talk about if that happens. Yeah, I'm so accustomed to, we need that board, and I might ask ASRock, can we have this board? And they said, yep, we'll absolutely send that to you. At the moment, we have a shortage, but it'll be with you in 2 weeks. And I sort of go, oh, do I want to wait 2 weeks? And if they say 2 weeks, they're generally pretty honest. It'll be about 2
Mhm.
weeks. But if I'm waiting on this one board to wrap up, a huge video that I want to get done, I'll just go buy it. So I think that happened with one of the ASRock boards. It was going to be a 2-3 week delay. They just didn't have any samples on hand. They'd all been essentially distributed. So I just went and bought one. Uh, and that took 1 day instead of 2 weeks. But again, that's the different position we're in, where we can just go buy whatever we want to get the content done, and we don't really have
Mhm.
to worry too much about what it costs or whether we'll necessarily break even or not. Fortunately, that content did really well, so we probably will. And that's also another example where, and I guess I'll talk about this because we mentioned it in the last podcast. So if you watch the last podcast till the end, I talked about how I was currently in negotiations with a few different companies to be our primary sponsor to get 4 Harbour Unboxed members to Taiwan in, I think it's like 7 weeks now or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's approaching.
It's approaching rapidly, and I paid for all the flights and accommodation, everything. So really, we just had to get some sponsorship money to cover that, and then we could go do our job, have some fun, and hopefully provide you guys with some good content. And for the last 5-6 years, MSI has sponsored us to the show. And you guys know the coverage that MSI has gotten from us over the years. Fair coverage, I would say. And I was in negotiations with MSI while I was releasing a video that absolutely ripped MSI boards to shreds, along with their competitors. So I suppose maybe that lessens the blow somewhat. But a lot of people pointed out, I think it's one of the most upvoted comments on that video, that it's very funny that we're praising MSI for their excellent OLED monitors in the ad spot that you put together. So there was some monitors that we reviewed really well. And that's another thing we only promote. We only allow brands like MSI to advertise products that we actually think you should buy. And so anyway, the ad spot was these MSI monitors that we were recommending you buy. And then the rest of the actual video was about MSI motherboards we recommend you definitely do not buy because they're trash. And I said as much. So that's sort of interesting how that plays out. But again, MSI didn't complain about it or anything. They was just like, well, that's how it works over at Harbour Unboxed. If you have a crap product, they let you know about it. And fortunately, they seem to think we do a good job because they do advertise with us. They do send us samples, and whenever they've been a bit concerned about a product being worse than they thought, they've gone and looked into our testing and been able to confirm it. So I guess after 7 or 8 years of that relationship on YouTube, it helps.
Yeah, and my preference is always to try and work with companies where possible, because the relationship that you have with a company can be very helpful when it comes to creating the review, because then you can get information about decisions that have been made. And part of that can be that they send out the product and then you go about your review process and you talk about some of the results so that you can provide information in the review that explains the results that you see or the decisions that have been made. Whereas if you're buying a product because there's no involvement that you have with the company, then often you can miss out on the opportunity to do that, really. So, yeah, I feel like that, again, it makes no difference whether we buy products or get them sent. My preference is to have them sent just because it does help out in that way. And yeah, reviewers who are doing their job properly will not have those sorts of things influence them in any way, whether it's, and I feel like having a really strong review process really helps with those sorts of things that, if you're more just testing it and giving your opinion based on a couple of days of usage and there's no real testing being done in the review, maybe you'd be more influenced in those sorts of things. But I test monitors, for example, in the exact same way every single time. So it's very difficult to have those sorts of decisions coming in and having any sort of influence over the reviews. And even if there was, it probably would get weeded out in other ways, just based on, the results kind of dictate the conclusions of those sorts of reviews. So yeah, and even with monitors, it comes down to the perspective of, I've got too many of them. Like, guys, please stop sending me stuff. I'd rather pick and choose a bit more with these things. And yeah, so again, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into those sorts of reviews and things. But I think most people who do reviews as a job are doing it for the viewers, for the readers, the consumers. They're doing it in a professional manner. They're trying to do the best job that they possibly can. They don't let those sorts of things influence them. They don't let ad deals influence them. Not that I'm saying that you would run an ad on a review for the product that you're reviewing. I mean more like how we are getting sponsored by MSI to go to Computex, but then we have to review MSI products at times as well. It's not something that influences our decision making in any way and our review process in any way, and that just comes with the experience and wanting to do the job properly, really. So
yeah, if you do a good enough job and you get a strong following and people recognize that you're doing a good job and you're putting the viewers' interests first and foremost, then I've always been of the opinion that the rest takes care of itself. if MSI make a crap product, there's no hesitation from me to tell people that it's a crap product. I don't
Mhm.
sugarcoat it. I don't try and weasel at it and be like, oh, but it's okay for this use case, or it's not so bad. It's like, no, it fails our standards, so it's crap. You should avoid it. There's a better product to buy. And if MSI have a change of heart and they change the way they've been doing things and they crack it and they're like, well, that's not good enough. We're not happy with that. We don't want to work with you guys anymore. Then that's going to go badly for them. ASRock tried that for a few years, went very badly for them. But also we have other companies lining up who want to work with us because of what we do. So, and MSI knows this. So if MSI decides to, play dirty, let's say, then they lose out. It hurts them. So it seems like the people at MSI that we deal with are smart enough to know that, and that's why they haven't made any dumb decisions like what we've seen from some of their competitors over the years.
It really all goes back to the trust that people have, and the opinions of the content is not set by us. It is set by the viewers and the readers. So if there's people that are watching our content and are uncomfortable with some of the advertising that we do on the channel or any of those sorts of aspects, and they see their trust placed in a different source who does things differently, I really have no issues or qualms with that. It's ultimately up to the people who are watching the content as to whether they value our opinion and value our reviews and things like that. So yeah, if someone wants to go to a source that doesn't run any advertising and doesn't have any products sent to them, and that's what they see the value in, like as the reviewer, you want to see products that are fully purchased by the review outlet. There's no advertising being run, no affiliate links, whatever the case may be. Then I'm totally comfortable with that decision. The only thing I can really control is making sure that I do the best quality content that I can make, that I'm doing the fairest and best job of reviewing products. I've got a process that makes sure that I'm doing everything fairly and accurately and that avoids those sorts of biases and influences. And ultimately, it's up to the viewers and readers to decide whether I've done a fair and good job of that.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, if people are sort of watching my content and are seeing that I don't know, maybe in 20 years I'll be a jaded reviewer that my standards have dropped significantly and I now suck at doing product reviews. I feel like that along with that would come, drops in viewership, drops in trust, drops in, the opinions of people watching the content, right? You're never going to escape that sort of thing and let that sort of thing slip really without your viewers and people letting you know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's sort of how I approach reviews. And I'm really big on trying to, as I said, try and do the best job that I possibly can do, and everything else takes care of itself. And yeah, we have to ultimately make money so we can actually afford to do the job that we do. So things like advertising and things like that are kind of a necessity in this business. Otherwise, you would see Hardware Unboxed being, I guess, a paywalled sort of outlet. And I never want to, for as long as it's possible, I want Hardware Unboxed review content to be free and accessible to everyone, funded by other means that allows us to continue making the content that we can make in the way that we want to make. And I feel like the balance that we've got to at the moment with how we approach reviews is really good and sustainable and allows the content that you see on the channel.
Yeah, that's right. And again, like, we only advertise products that we think are good. There's been examples in the past where I've reviewed a motherboard, found the motherboard to be crap. That's led to, or at least I'm not taking full credit for this, but maybe Gamers Nexus said the board wasn't good as well, as an example. That has collectively led to poor sales. And then they've approached us and said, well, this board you reviewed that you didn't really like, we've got a heap of them, they're not selling well. Can we pay you to advertise it? Like, that's actually happened. That exact scenario has taken place. And we've said, no, it's a crap board. We didn't recommend it in our video, so we're not going to push it for you. And we've also had other ads where we've said we don't work with AMD, NVIDIA, or Intel, but we're fully aware that those companies have big budgets and they have partners, and they can then allocate budget to partners. And we've had examples back in the Turing days, the GeForce 20 series days, where I won't give a name because I don't actually know a name off the top of my head, but an NVIDIA partner, let's say, has said, can you talk about how amazing ray tracing is and how you don't want to game without it? And there was like 3 games that sort of used it, and 2 of them were an abomination. And we're like, no, we're not talking about ray tracing being a key selling point because we don't believe it to be a key selling point yet. When it is, we'll talk about it. And there's a bit of back and forth there, but we just firmly said we're not promoting this feature in that manner. We're not parroting BS marketing material, and we didn't. And in pretty much every instance they give in, they're like, well, okay, do it your way, because they still want the product. And the product that we were advertising was a good product, mind you. Like, it was a product that we recommended. It's just we didn't recommend it for those specific use cases or specific reasons. So we still want to be we still want to be accurate, clear in the ads. Like, you're not saying this OLED monitor is the best thing ever and will give you 20/20 vision. Like, we're not parroting some sort
Yeah,
of
that's right.
It's like, it's good because of the reasons I've already told you in my dedicated video, but this is just helping them get more eyeballs on the product. And that's, I think, what we've always pushed to any of the companies we work with. If we've even if we've purchased it ourselves, if we've come across a product that we actually think is genuinely good through, we've got all the fact-based scientific testing and stuff to prove that it is a good product, and maybe 20,000 people watch that video, and you want to sell more of that product, then that's a good product to promote on other content, because it's a product we believe in and genuinely think or know to be good.
And I think having Balin, who does a lot of our video editing, as some of the Hardware Unboxed fans will know, but also deals with a lot of our advertising now, is really helpful in terms of a bit more of that separation between ad deals and making content. So when it comes to making, the MSI OLED ad that we did on the channel recently, that is a product that I tested, I didn't hear about having to make that ad until like Balin had sewn up all the details. Really, he just sends me the things. I'm like, okay, I'll see what I'm willing to say, what I'm not willing to say in this ad, which is, Balin has already weeded out a lot of the things that I probably wouldn't say in those ads anyway. And, it's all organized after the reviews have been published on the channel, so that it's not like, they're sending me a product being like, we want to advertise this product on the channel, but first you need to review it to see whether it's good. I have no idea what advertising deals are being worked on in the background by Balin. I just go and review the product as I normally review it, and then later, he tells me, hey, they want to advertise that product on the channel. I think that's a really good way of, managing those sorts of potential issues that can come about with the crossover between having to be a reviewer but also potentially advertising products. Is, if everything is done afterwards, then there's no potential for influence there, really.
Yes. Well, I know this is something we want to talk about in the future, the sort of whole advertising thing. And I know we talk about it a lot with our Patreon and Float Play members on our, exclusive live streams and all that sort of stuff. But it would be cool to have a conversation and maybe even bring Balin into it and get his perspective on it, because it is quite interesting. You and I both aren't really driven by money and almost loathe the money side of it, like running it as a business. We're all about the products and testing them and doing the reviews. But money is a necessary evil, I suppose. So, we kind of need to make it and pay wages for guys like Balin. But there have been a lot of instances where Balin's come up and found what he thought was a really good company, BetterHelp being one of the more recent examples, and spent a lot of time and effort in making that deal possible. And then and basically what you're saying is it comes to you and you know nothing about it. It's basically all sorted and done, which maybe isn't the most optimized approach, but again, we kind of hate advertising and dealing with it. And then once Balin had done all that, we sort of had to tell him, well, actually, we've looked into this. We found a few red flags and things we're not too happy about. Can you ask these guys some questions about this stuff? And then we just had to make the decision, and we pulled out in the end and decided not to go through with it, which, does suck for Balin and all his hard work. But in a way, that's sort of what he's paid to do, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot that we can talk about there and go into probably in a future podcast.
Yeah, I think that'd be good as well. It also allows us to sort of, form our thoughts, really, because, some of the things we've been talking about, I sort of jotted down some notes about reviewing before this podcast, just so that we don't miss anything. I feel like advertising and the way that we operate our channel in that way, which I know is very similar to a lot of other channels in this position in terms of how they deal with advertising and those sorts of deals. There's probably a lot of things that we haven't even touched on in this review that really goes into it. But I guess my very basic summary for people about those sorts of things is really that as a professional reviewer, it is your job to not have those things influence the review. It is 100% your responsibility as a reviewer to ensure that it does not influence it. And if you're doing your job properly, you have a process that means it is impossible for those types of things to influence your reviews, subconsciously or not. It should not be possible. I think on a channel like Hardware Unboxed, we provide the data that we test. So you can see it in the videos, exactly the results that we get. So if we are suddenly coming up with bizarre conclusions that do not match the data whatsoever and are just really strange and not like things that you've seen before, then you should probably be pretty concerned. But I feel like most of the content, all of the content that we make, comes directly from that sort of testing data and the processes that we've put in place. So again, the viewers, the readers, the listeners to the podcast and those sorts of things, you are ultimately the people who decide whether our content is worth watching, whether it's worth your time, whether it's worth signing up to our Patreon and Float Planning accounts. You decide that, and I don't begrudge you one way or another whether you think our content is good or bad. Ultimately, that's something that you guys can decide, and that's up to you. So, yeah. Right, that's that discussion done. It's taken us over an hour, but I think it was a good discussion. But anyway, let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about the other things that have been going on in our boring lives. All right, Steve, we're back. What's been going on in your life?
Well, the Computex deal's done. Probably alluded to that a bit earlier on, but yeah, MSI will be our primary sponsor for the 6th or 7th year running, and Thermal Grizzly will be our secondary sponsor, and they have a little booth this year. Hope I'm allowed to say that. They've got some other stuff. I probably can't say too much because you have to wait and see, but MSI, Thermal Grizzly, two companies we enjoy working with that are very good to work with. MSI providing us with editing PCs and all that stuff like last year, so that should be good. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to go now that it's pretty well all sorted. So
yeah, it should be nice. Looking forward to it.
That's that side of things. I don't think there's too much more to say there just at the moment. I did mention a few episodes ago that I got a 4G/5G phone booster installed in the office because for whatever reason, Telstra have sort of ruined our reception in the area as of like November last year. And I was only getting, I use my phone for uploading our videos because it's the fastest way to do it. And I used to get 5 bars and I was flat out very fast all the time. I think we could upload sort of a 10 gigabyte video in about half an hour. That blew out to multiple hours because I was only getting between 1 to 3 bars and it was just fluctuating up and down. Anyway, bought this 5G phone booster thing, set it up. Took about an hour for me to get it all set up and working. And we've been running it now for about 2 weeks. It has been flawless, and I currently have 5 bars, and uploading videos is back to the performance it used to be. So not sure why that was necessary.
It shouldn't be on you as the customer to install how much did it cost? A few $1,000s to get the phone booster installed?
It'd be just over $1,000 for the 4G version. The 5G version is much more expensive. That was $3,500 for that full kit. So I purchased that and installed it and got it set up and working. But yeah, it's a bit ridiculous. I've been here for about 14 years, and in that time we've had 5 bars of reception for 14 years. So I'd left it about 6 months, and I just thought this is annoying. I've given them 6 months to fix or change whatever it is. I still don't know what the problem is or what's going on. Anyway, I did a lot of research about these boosters. I was pretty confident it would work. It's really interesting, but it technically makes perfect sense. The download speed on 5G was very good, even with the weak reception, and the booster hasn't actually improved it. It's probably made it more consistent, but it hasn't actually increased the amount of bandwidth we get coming in. But what it has done is made the upload speed 6 times, 7, 8, 9, 10 times faster. So it's amplified the outgoing signal. So it's received at a much higher strength, and therefore that boosts the bandwidth. So that's what I wanted. I wanted stronger, more reliable upload speeds, and it sort of explains why the weaker reception really hurt the upload performance. So the booster's done wonders in improving the upload performance. So that's great. I'm happy with it. Couldn't be happier. Again, it's a bit odd, annoying, frustrating that I need it, but the fact that I can get it and it does work is great. So
nice.
I don't know. pitfalls of living in rural Victoria, I guess. And talking of, I don't know, dumb, silly things, I'll get your opinion on this.
Sure.
You love your sports, you watch your football, cricket, all that sort of stuff. You're basically like my dad. He watches all that stuff all the time as well. And whenever I speak to my dad, I hear about how crap Foxtel is and he's cancelling it now. He's got KO, and then there's always a problem. Like, he's not happy with it. I'm like, yeah, well, welcome to a monopolistic sort of scenario. Like, that's just how that goes. So my boring, dumb story is 12 months ago, for the first time in my life, I got Foxtel because it was $54 a month. It was their Easter special. And I thought, that's really cool. I've got a big TV. 1080p looks awful on it. I really need to get 4K AFL football. So I signed up. I thought, it's a bit absurd paying $54 a month, and I only use it to watch one game of football a week. But that's what I'm doing because I want to see it in 4K.
Yep. And for people who aren't aware, Foxtel is the equivalent of like a cable TV subscription service. So it requires a dedicated box. I think it's now done over the internet, but it still requires a dedicated box and service and subscription.
That's a good point. I'll talk about that. I'll expand how dumb this is. So there's two services for watching Australian football, the Australian Football League, so the AFL. There's KO, which is Foxtel, but it's like, the cheap version of Foxtel?
It's like a streaming app version equivalent to like a Netflix or Amazon Prime, where it's an app that is entirely over the internet. You don't need a dedicated box. You just run on your Android phone or smart TV or media player. And so it's equivalent to that. I think there's services overseas like ESPN Plus sort of things, or there's like the NBA Live Pass for people who want to watch basketball games in the US. Similar to that. It's just a service app that you pay for.
So it was something like a year ago, you could get the KO Basic, which was, I think, $25, and it allowed two people to use it simultaneously.
Yeah.
And that was 1080p highest streaming quality. Then you could get KO Premium, let's say, and that was $35, and it was 3 devices, still 1080p. So I have a 98-inch TV. I know I'm a YouTuber. And it's...
you're exposed now.
It's 4K, and I was often getting anywhere from 720p to 1080p on KO. And let me tell you, 720p on a 4K 98-inch screen from any distance is not good. It's unwatchable. You can almost not tell who's who. 1080p is pretty blurry, pretty bad. And it is watchable, but it's not great. So anyway, KO was kind of out of the question, and that's what I had been using up until I got the big TV. So I thought, well, there's this, it's normally like $70 for Foxtel, the 4K streaming service. So I thought, I'm going to get this Easter special thing, $54, and so be it. And so I ordered it now. As Tim said, you get a box with Foxtel, and you might think, so that uses a satellite or cable or something different. It's like, nope, it is no different to KO at all. Like it.
So yeah, it used to be over cable or satellite. So in some of the previous places I've lived, there's a physical satellite dish attached to the house, or I think in like Melbourne, for example, it would run over like its own cable lines that are put into the streets and stuff, which is a weird way of doing it. But it used to be that way, but recently they changed it to being over the internet effectively.
So it's like a smart TV box essentially that just uses your Wi-Fi or Ethernet, same thing, uses your local internet to do its thing, to stream services. So it's no different to KO, but it has a dumb box that then sort of limits you to one TV. And if you want to have it on another TV, you got to buy another dumb box. So that was already frustrating, that I knew there was no real technical reason for why I had to pay more money for the same service just so I could get 4K. And then on top of that, you only get 4K quality if you watch the game live. So although I was paying for Foxtel, if I didn't record the game or I missed the game and I wanted to watch it like an hour later the next day or whatever, it would be 1080p only. So I found that very frustrating. The 4K wasn't on demand. It was only while the game was live. So that also sucked. But anyway, it looked a lot better on my TV, and I was able to watch the football during the football season once a week. So that was all fine. 12 months later, my Easter special deal comes to an end, and it's no longer $54, and it was going to be $77 or $78, something like that. And at the same time, KO now became 4K for this year. So the whole thing just became pointless. So I rang up to cancel my Foxtel, which is always funny. That was like an hour on the phone. It's criminal
so
they can do
bad.
that, isn't it? It's that's a story in on itself that I may or may not tell. But so, well, actually, I guess the point is I rang them up and I said, look, I already pay for KO Premium. I still paid for that entire period because, my dad uses it, my grandma, for example. You're allowed to have 3 people on it simultaneously. So I pay for that. I don't even use it. I just said to them, they can keep using it. I'll use the Foxtel. But I didn't really want it to increase by 70% or whatever it was. So I rang up, tried to cancel it. Oh yeah, you want to cancel? I'll put you through the right department. So you wait on the phone for 5 minutes and then you go through the right department. Oh, why do you want to cancel? It was like an hour thing. And I said to them, well, the reason I want to cancel is because the price increase is significant and I only watch 1 game of football per week on it. So it's not worth me paying $77 a month for that. I can just use KO.
Yep.
And they said, oh, well, we'll see what deal we can do for you. I said, okay. I said to them, look, I'm happy to pay $54 and I'll just continue doing that, even though it doesn't really make sense now that KO is 4K, but it's set up, it works. I'll just keep doing it. I guess it's sort of the lazy option. So they go away for 15 minutes while I'm sitting there benchmarking while my phone's on speaker playing the stupid Foxtel soundtrack. And she comes back and she's like, oh, okay, so we can do it for $71. And I'm like, how about 54? Like, I don't want to pay 71. I said I was paying 54 and I will continue to do that. Like, you've got me as a customer at 54 and surely they're making money, right? Like, surely they have to know what you watch as well, right? Like, they definitely keep that data. Don't try and convince me they don't. So they could probably look up and see that what I'm telling them is the truth. I watch 1 football match. And the more I thought about it, the more they talked me out of it. I was like, I'm such an idiot. But I got it for the Easter special, so I guess that's my defense. But I only watch Foxtel to watch probably 1 game of football, maybe 2 games of football per week during the football season. The other months of the year, I'm paying for the subscription service and I never turn it on. Like, it doesn't come on.
Yeah.
So I'm like, God, that's ridiculous. But I suppose I do a similar thing with KO. It's just cheaper. So it's less of a waste of money. So by the end of it, I was happy to not be spending the $54, really. They'd kind of talked me out of it because they made me think about it. And I'm like, well, it's, I only watch, how many games are there a football per season? 20 something. So
per team, yeah.
Yeah, per team. Yeah, and I only watch 1 team, really. Occasionally I watch another game, but it's not a whole lot of bandwidth that I'm using. So in the end, $71 was the best they could do. So I proceeded for the next 20 minutes going through the hoops to actually cancel it. And then I had to, mail back the gear and all that. So they've paid to have the secondhand used gear mailed back to them. And now they've lost $54 a month for essentially nothing. So it's just...
Yep. And you'll be paying for the exact same thing, but now at a lower cost. Even though you said you'd pay for the same thing at a higher cost, you're now paying it at a lower cost. So they've lost money on you as a customer through that process.
Yep. So it's just dumb. Like, but anyway, I guess they've saved me from myself in a sense. So I just use the KO service that I was paying for. It's now 4K. It works perfectly fine. It's as good as what the Foxtel box was, but I have the convenience now for $35. Simultaneously, I can have it on my 77-inch OLED out in the studio, and then my TV in the house, and on my phone if I have to go to the toilet or something. And it's saved me money to have a better service.
Yeah. I had a pretty similar experience when I tried to cancel Foxtel, and basically the exact same thing of like, I'm going to be a customer at this price. And the price that they came back with was much higher than what I had said. I'm like, cool, well, cancel it then because I'm not interested. And moved to KO. But 4K coming to KO this year has certainly improved the image quality. Not every game is in 4K. It does depend on the broadcast, but most games are, and the quality improvement is noticeable
Not
over
significant.
1080p.
Oh, it's massive. Yeah.
So yeah, even on my TV and other screens that I've got around the place. So yes, Foxtel is bad. KO is, if you've got a good internet connection and the stream is working okay, it's reasonable. So yeah, that's definitely the way to go. And I think last week I said that there were no wins in sight for my team in the AFL, the Adelaide Crows, and I was very wrong on that, because I think the next day they narrowly beat Carlton for their first win of the season in a massive upset. So that was nice. I enjoyed that. Getting a win every once in a while is nice, and the Crows play tonight, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if they knock off the Bombers, what do you reckon? What are you predicting? I think they win.
I think it's a 50-50 match. I think because they're playing in Adelaide, so it's a home match for the Crows, I think that does improve their chances. If this has been played in Melbourne, I wouldn't have given them much of a chance. But I think the two teams are in a similar position, so we'll see. We'll see. It could go either way, but I think more likely that the Crows will win, but you never know. They haven't been going that well.
If I gambled, which I don't, I'd be putting the money on the Crows.
Yes, but you wouldn't have done so last week, would you?
No. No, admittedly, I would not have. No, not a chance. I actually would have put a lot of money on Carlton to win if I was the betting type. So thankfully, I'm not, because
yes, that's right. And obviously, your team Melbourne has a bye this week, so no, you won't even be using your KO subscription potentially for this week.
I might watch the game while I benchmark. I'll probably watch your game tonight, just so I can
have some entertainment.
So I can send you messages live and see your reactions.
Yeah, that would be nice. There's a few good games on tomorrow as well. If you're watching neutral games like Collingwood Port and Brisbane Geelong, those should be even Carlton GWS. Tomorrow's actually a bumper.
It's a bit of a stacked one.
Day.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of good matchups.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to talk about this week, and my little what else have I been doing, has been that I finished playing Dragon's Dogma 2, which I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I was playing. So managed to get towards the end of the true ending of the game. There are multiple endings to the game. The true ending is definitely worth getting to and definitely worth playing. It's a very interesting ending to the game that changes up a few things and gives you a few additional hours of stuff to do, and that was good. So, yeah, I'd recommend playing this game. I wouldn't give it like a super, super strong recommendation, like a must-play sort of title. But I think in general, I would recommend playing it. There are definitely issues with the PC version, obviously the performance stuff we've talked about previously. With that said, while the performance in the city of Vermont, which is like one of the earlier cities that you get to, it is horrendous performance there. Quite a significant chunk of the game occurs outside of the city where performance is better. So a lot of the boss fights, encounters, lots of story missions and quests take place outside of the city. So if you've seen a lot of the performance data in the city and you're like, wow, I don't want to put up with that for a whole game, that looks really horrendous, you will be in the city for parts of the early part of the game, but towards the middle, later parts of the game, you rarely have to go back there, which does improve things a little bit. There are a few visual glitches and things. I've been playing it on the max settings, and there's just a few things which don't look great. Parts of the game look better than others, but yeah, there are some sort of visual glitchy stuff as well. So even the performance you get at other times, I would say a lot of the time probably doesn't really justify how the game looks visually, which is a bit disappointing. But outside of that, the game is quite good, and there's been quite a few things that I've really liked about this as sort of a single-player open-world RPG. I think that the pawn system that they implemented, where you create your own character, but then shortly afterwards you create this NPC for yourself that goes around and helps you in battles, and then you can hire other people's pawns that they've created, their NPCs, to join your party of up to 4 people. So yourself, the pawn you've created, and then you can hire 2 additional pawns. And the thing that really impressed me about that system is that these aren't just like the usual garbage AI NPCs that help you out in other games, which they just stand around doing nothing while you have to do 99% of the fighting. These NPCs are like genuinely useful. The AI is quite good. They sort of even learn some of your tactics, like parts of the game you can throw people off cliffs or you can climb on some of the bosses and start attacking them. When you start doing that, your pawn will then start imitating you later, which is quite good. And yeah, having good quality pawns helps you out significantly throughout the game and doesn't just make it like you have to do everything. So yeah, I appreciated that. I also quite liked that a lot of the class systems in the games, there's a lot of different fighting styles you can have, like a mage, an archer, fighters. There's a few other really interesting things later, like I think partway through the game, I got the Mystic Spear Hand ability, which is like a class of its own where you fight with this spear thing. That was a really fun class to play as. And I feel like a lot of the classes throughout the game that you can just change whenever you want are really well made, and each of them have an individual feel to them. So it feels like you're playing as a different type of fighter, but they also are all still fun and interesting to play. So as you go through the game, it's a lot of silly stuff in there. It doesn't take itself too seriously, I don't think. Some good, interesting quests and mechanics. There was one quest I played later in the game where you're in this like room of people and you had to try and figure out which of the people in the room was like an assassin trying to assassinate someone. And basically you just have to go and just tackle whoever you think is like the assassin. If you tackle the wrong person, it's like, oh no, the target you were going for gets killed. If you tackle the right person, it's all rosy. So there's a few interesting things in there like that, and obviously some quite fun, compelling boss fights throughout the game. So yeah, I recommend this. As I said, not a hugely strong recommendation, but I think it's worth playing. And yeah, the ending is very, very interesting once you get to the true ending. So yeah, that's Dragon's Dogma 2. I think it's a good game. That brings us to the end of the Hardware Unbox podcast for this week. As always, if you want to support Hardware Unbox, we've got Patreon and Floatplane. Soon we'll be doing our monthly exclusive live stream, so they'll be coming up shortly, and you'll be able to jump on board and get basically like this, but live, and talking about maybe some more behind the scenes stuff and yeah, audio feed. We've got our YouTube channel. Check out all that stuff, and we'll be back next week for another episode. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.